I got up, probably on my seat, but just about, because George was my favourite, and I yelled out, "George!" at the top of my lungs.
Good on you.
It's interesting you say that, Cindy, because historians say that Till There Was You was and Ringo singing "Boy" are the two most remembered songs of their tour. But what else can you recall of that night?
Well, it's probably not a huge amount, but what I have since discovered is that the concert was only 35 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise that. I Googled it a while back when it was the 50th anniversary to see if I could see the concert. And if you Google the Melbourne concert, it's the same one as we saw here. And it's only 35 minutes long. And that's just unbelievable. It seemed like it went on forever.
Mm-hmm. Our guest yesterday, a music journalist, said the biggest factor in the news when the Beatles came was actually about their hair. It's hard to believe now, but it was seen as quite radical. Can you recall that?
Oh, totally. And I had an uncle who was, he hated the Beatles, couldn't bear the Beatles, and used to go on about their hair, and my cousin was never allowed to listen to them. And, that was really a big deal. And, to have hair that touched your collar, my goodness me, that was just,
the Beatle cut.
Beyond belief, yeah.
Well, Cindy, it's lovely to have you on the panel to recall your night with the Beatles at the age of 14 in Row G.
I tell you what, it's travelled a long way with me, and it's a wonderful experience to recall.
Oh, thank you very much,
that's
Cindy.
Fabulous.
Yeah. There you go, Jenny. Aren't memories that you create young when they're very, very special like that, just memories
stick with you forever.
Stick with you.
They do.
Yeah.
And I just think what a thing to be able to tell your grandchildren that you saw
Right?
the Beatles live. I mean,
amazing.
the kids might go, "Who are the Beatles?" You never know. But I just think that would be just one of those things that you just never forget. It must have been so loud though, all that screaming.
Well, that's the point. I mean, I don't think anybody actually heard the music ever. That was the point, as they all went along and there was just screaming, and the guys couldn't hear themselves play. They had no foldback. They just played with the amps that sat behind them, and they said they could never hear anything, and Ringo couldn't hear himself play the drums. But when somebody got a recording of it, they actually managed to play together in spite of the fact they couldn't hear each other, and they couldn't hear each other. They were such good musicians. They were still played together in time and sequence, which is really good.
But also pop has that wonderful sort of beat system that allows them all to just, if they could just keep in the rhythm, they'd be fine, wouldn't they?
Well, and Ringo Starr, a vastly underestimated drummer too, by the way.
Big response to huge response to dogs.
You were
Trench says, can't believe dogs are allowed on public transport. Not all people like dogs, and now we have to put up with them. This is such a bad idea.
Cheery fellow, isn't he?
Sid Grouchy of Stratford.
Yeah. Come
Look,
on.
you saying before that you quite liked A Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin. A friend of mine's just released a new album, Paul McClaney with Gramsci, and he's put this album out called Inheritance, and you should download it and have a listen to it because you would absolutely love it. It's one of the greatest recordings in New Zealand history, I believe. I think it's going to be an absolute groundbreaker when it comes out.
We're going to go out with a little bit of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Here it comes. Beautiful. Very, very soon because, it's dedicated to Cindy. I Want to Hold Your Hand from, of course, the Beatles, and you have both been wonderful. Peter Elliott and
Thanks, mate.
Jenny Morton. Thank you very much.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a financially stretched AJ Hackett Bungie gets a $10 million government bailout. We asked the Tourism Minister how he's picking winners. Fact or fairy tale, we investigate claims a homeless man tailgated his way into a 5-star hotel for 2 weeks of luxury isolation. Another case of COVID arrives via a flight from India. That's a total of 11 active cases. The Health Minister's promising more testing at the border, including customs and aviation services and security air crews. Light rail skids off the tracks thanks to New Zealand First, and time's up for Afghan cookies and Eskimo pie ice creams. So what should we call them now?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Health Minister is still refusing to explain how or why a large group of people were released from managed isolation early without being tested. Most of those allowed out of of compassionate grounds were not tested, nor were about half of all those released between June the 9th and 16th. David Clark today repeatedly deferred to the Director-General of Health when asked how this had been allowed to happen.
What has clearly happened is that it hasn't been delivered as ministers reasonably expected it was going to be delivered.
Officials still want to test 4 people, and the police have been brought in to find one of them. People in managed isolation at Rotorua's Ibis Hotel remain in lockdown, with one saying the lack of communication is frustrating. A note from the Ministry of Health was put under their door this morning telling them to stay in their rooms. There is speculation it's because of a positive COVID-19 test, but the Director-General of Health says he cannot confirm that. A guest has told RNZ they have had no more information since the note. She says there has been poor communication right from the moment they boarded a bus from the hotel 4 days ago. The number of people seeking a COVID-19 test at an Auckland community testing station has tripled during the past week. The director of the Whānau Ora Community Clinic in Wiri, George Ngatai, says there were previously around 100 people a day seeking tests, and now there are about 300. He says the clinic is well stocked with testing supplies despite the demand.
We assess where we're currently at every day. We've certainly seen that our numbers have increased sometimes double, triple the amount that we're normally used to, but as and when that increase is identified, we request more support.
George Ngatai of the Whānau Ora Community Clinic. The Customs Minister has admitted staff working at international airports have not received any training to prepare for the rising number of New Zealanders returning home. Responding to an official information request by National's Customs spokesperson Simon O'Connor, the state agency says no new training has been done. Mr O'Connor says this proves the government is not taking border protection seriously. The Customs Minister, Jenny Salesa, says health officials have visited airports to ensure custom officers know how to wear masks and gloves, and border staff are regularly tested for COVID-19. More than $650,000 worth of assets have been seized from the Comanchero gang in Auckland, and 3 men have been arrested. Operation Rider is the latest in a string of gang raids by the police this week. Mackenzie Smith reports.
The police say a patched member, a gang associate and a motor vehicle dealer appeared in the Auckland District Court today on money laundering and organised crime charges. 5 high-value luxury vehicles, including a limited edition Mercedes worth more than $250,000, were seized. The police say Operation Rider started late last year, and they're not ruling out further arrests or charges. Call Mackenzie Smith, TNA.
Meanwhile, 3 AK-47s and 2 semi-automatic firearms have been seized in further raids targeting the Mongols gang in Bay of Plenty. That brings the total number of firearms seized to 13. 17 people are now before the court, facing more than 250 charges. The Reserve Bank has left the benchmark interest rate unchanged at its record low of 0.25%. At the same time, it's promising to do more if needed to support the economy against the impact of COVID-19. Here's our business editor, Giles Beckford.
The Reserve Bank has delivered the expected script, saying the risks to the economy are to the downside, but taking no other policy action. It notes there's been an earlier than expected rebound in spending and activity, but says conditions are fragile and uncertain, and the stronger New Zealand dollar isn't helping exporters. But it's left the door wide open to further action, such as expanding its bond buying programme and cutting the cash rate further. Options it will flesh out in its August statement. This is Giles Beckford.
It's 4 minutes past 5. The interim Warriors Rugby League head coach has wasted no time in laying down the law to his players, demanding they toughen up. Todd Payton, who was previously assistant coach, has taken over the top job following the sacking of Stephen Kearney.
We haven't been tough enough for long enough, or consistent. Those 2 things are the things that we need to change. It's not going to happen immediately. It is a thing that's going to take a little bit of time.
Warriors interim coach Todd Payton has until the end of the season to impress the club's owners that he's up to taking on the job permanently. The All Black and Crusaders lock Scott Barrett will miss the rest of the Super Rugby Aotearoa competition due to a foot injury that requires surgery. Barrett injured his big toe during a training match last week and was forced to miss the side's win over the Hurricanes at the weekend. Cody Taylor will replace Barrett as the Crusaders captain. The noose found in NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace's garage was actually a handle on a garage door and had been there since last year. An FBI investigation has concluded. NASCAR says it's pleased it wasn't an intentional racist act against Wallace. Major League Baseball and the Players Association have agreed to shorten 60-game season, ending weeks of heated talks between team owners and players. Players will report for training by Wednesday next week, with the season starting 3 weeks later. That's the news.
The scramble to test.
The Ministry of Health have alerted to us that by 5 o'clock, if you haven't got a test, they're reporting you to the police, and we don't want you to get reported and the police to turn up to your house.
As politicians turn up the heat.
It points to a government that has lost control of its border management system.
A scientist calls for calm.
The isolation is our best defence, right? It's not the testing, it's about the isolation.
Testing times. Morning report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, rain spreading south, possibly heavy and thundery. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery in Northland. Strong to gale easterlies until tomorrow morning. For Coromandel, rain with heavy and thundery falls developing tonight. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, cloudy periods and a few showers tonight. Rain tomorrow with some heavy falls. Strong to gale easterlies developing tonight. Waikato to Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, including the Central High Country, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly fine today. Occasional rain developing tomorrow, but remaining mostly dry in Kapiti. Strong gusty southeasterlies developing tomorrow. Wellington, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Cloud increasing tonight with patchy rain or drizzle in Wellington, Marlborough and Canterbury and eastern Otago. Fine spells developing south of Dunedin tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine weather. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers overnight. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, fact or fiction, we investigate whether a homeless man could have possibly tailgated on isolating travellers for a 5-star 2-week getaway. And the government's funding an overstretched AJ Hackett bungee to the tune of $10 million. But first, we have one new case of COVID-19 today. A woman who returned home on an Air India flight and was in isolation at Auckland's Pullman Hotel. That means there's now a total of 11 active cases. At least 7 of those are people who've arrived from India. The Health Minister yesterday announced beefed up COVID protocols at the border, including testing customs workers, immigration and aviation security, and international air and maritime crews. So how is that all going to work? Well, the Health Minister, David Clark, joins us now. Good evening, Minister. Before we move on to border testing, I just want to start with today's developments. 51 out of 54 people who left isolation early were not tested for COVID-19. What responsibility do you take for that?
Good evening, Lisa. Overall, I do want to acknowledge that our procedures have worked, but this is an area where they clearly were not followed. And so I have, of course, along with other ministers, expressed incredible frustration on behalf of New Zealanders that this hasn't worked as we had expected it to.
But
and
whose
the Director General has accepted,
is that?
If I could finish answer the question, the Director General has accepted responsibility on behalf of the system and is setting about fixing it.
So, do you then take no responsibility as Health Minister for this?
Well, I think as the Prime Minister's outlined in Parliament yesterday, there were separate assurances that the system was in place, that people were being tested.
But I'm asking you, the Health Minister, do you take any responsibility for this mistake?
Well, look, I take responsibility for fixing it.
Or are you putting it all at Dr. Bloomfield's feet?
This clearly is an operational error, and that has been acknowledged. Dr. Bloomfield has taken responsibility for it and is setting about fixing it. I, of course, want assurances that that is on track, and at this stage I can see that the Ministry is indeed getting on and fixing the problem.
So can you just give me a clear yes or no on this? Do you take no responsibility for this at all?
The responsibility for this sits at an operational level.
So that's a no.
I found the system.
So that's a no.
I found the system was not working. I suspended any compassionate exemptions. Immediately I found that system was not working as ministers were led to believe it was.
Why can't you just state that simply? You don't take any responsibility. That's what you're telling me, isn't it?
Well, Lisa, I have responsibility for sorting it out.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, how's your relationship with the Director General of Health, seen as this has all been lumped at his feet as his responsibility and his mistake? How are you going with your relationship?
Well, I think we have a very good working relationship. I think New Zealanders
is it as good as it was, Minister?
Yes, and I think New Zealanders as a whole would acknowledge that Dr Bloomfield has played an incredibly important role in the position New Zealand finds itself in the world as the envy of most other countries being COVID-free. And that has had a lot to do with Dr Bloomfield being a public health specialist who has played a pivotal role in New Zealand eliminating community spread of COVID-19, something that most other countries in the world would like to achieve.
Have you thrown them under the bus on this one?
Dr Bloomfield has accepted responsibility for it and is fixing it, and that is the thing that I think matters to most New Zealanders, that we actually don't have these problems happening again. We want to stay COVID free because people have made sacrifices to get here.
We've had a number of cases in recent days, people arriving on Air India flights. So I'm wondering, what assurances can you give us around international crews? There was an Air India flight today. So did that crew get tested at all, or where did they go after the plane landed?
Those crews go into self-isolation if they're overnighting here, and otherwise, I mean, with international flights, either people immediately return back overseas or they're required to go into self-isolation here. Very similar to New Zealand crews who are travelling in New Zealand, for example, to LA or San Francisco. They have a strict regime making sure that they are in managed or self-isolation during their stay.
At the same hotels that other people are isolating at, or do they choose their own hotels?
They are taken in separate transport. There is a protocol around making sure that they don't come into contact with other people.
So are they going to different isolation hotels than the government is using?
I don't have the detail of which hotels they're using. I could find that out for you, Lisa.
So who keeps an eye on them to make sure they play by the rules?
There's an expectation that they are, of course, because it's a privilege to come to New Zealand and to operate here. It is actually something I have asked officials at the Ministry of Health to give me further assurance around. There's no suggestion that they're not. I have not received any reports that they're not. But again, we're looking at ways to provide additional insurance because we want to make sure that our border is rock solid. We're in this privileged position in the world, and we want to stay there.
So will they be subject to COVID tests? Those international crews?
They are international folk who are here. They're not New Zealand citizens who we can compel in that way unless we believe that they present a genuine public health risk to us.
So by law you can't test them?
Well, unless they present my understanding is unless they present a public health risk, that we're trying to ensure very clearly that they don't.
So when you say that aircrew will be tested, you're referring only to New Zealand citizens, Air New Zealand staff?
Yeah, those who are resident in New Zealand. We don't want people going into the community without having, who are going to high-risk destinations overseas. Let's not forget just how rampant COVID is. It's spreading at the fastest rate overseas in many countries than it has at any stage. We don't want those people coming back and going into our communities without first having a period of a couple of days to see if any symptoms develop and then having a negative test. So it's a tightening of the regime. Of course, on those flights and when they're overseas, they've got very strict protocols around PPE use, around remaining in their hotels when they're there. So, we don't think there is a risk, but we just want that extra assurance.
But given there has been quite a few cases arriving back from India, are you concerned at all about Air India crew?
Well, I think India as a whole has got a growing number of COVID cases. We can expect more New Zealanders to be coming back with COVID. That's the reality. These New Zealanders are New Zealand citizens who have a right to come back to New Zealand, their home, but we have to take precautions, and we are continuing to
So will you ask the crew if they would volunteer for a test? Are you going to do that, to ask air crews from other countries whether they will voluntarily take a test?
Look, it's certainly as a part of the assurance piece around these flights from overseas crews, something that I'm talking about with the Ministry.
How many, you said these were effective immediately, these announcements that you made last night, so how many aircrew have been tested as a result of the new rules?
Aircrew have actually, the regime's actually been in place, was in place last week, is what I've been advised. So the crew are being put into they're expected to self-isolate and then be tested, return a negative result before they return to the community. Of course, the first line of defence is making sure people don't get sick, and that is through the appropriate PPE use, and we've got no evidence of people having picked anything up on the flights, those crew, but this is an extra assurance that we're putting in place.
Minister, I know you've got to go, but very quickly, are masks going to be compulsory on flights, international flights?
We have, the Director General of Health has written to all airlines requesting that they supply a pack with masks in it and possibly other PPE for every person who flies, that they demonstrate how to use it and that there be a clear expectation that people use it. There's no, of course, there's no legal basis internationally, but then what I would say is that if everyone has it in front of them and demonstration of how to use it properly, I expect people will use it to keep themselves safe and those who are around them safe.
So it's not compulsory by law?
The other thing I would add is that when people do arrive here and they're going into managed isolation facilities, they are New Zealanders who have a responsibility to play their part, and those who go into managed isolation facilities are those who are considered low risk. Those who are demonstrating they're not willing to play their part are much more likely to end up in quarantine facilities where there is going to be closer monitoring.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is the Health Minister, David Clark. Meanwhile, Labour's call for National to put up or shut up over claims a homeless man snuck into an Auckland isolation hotel has been met with radio silence. Housing Minister Megan Woods sent National's Michael Woodhouse a letter telling him to prove his story, which he went public with last week in a bid to illustrate poor border management. Woodhouse has yet to prove the homeless man exists, but says just because there's no evidence of the hotel stay story, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Nita Blake-Person filed this report, which began last Thursday morning.
Oh, look, there's just another one. It was a more flippant one that I became aware of. The source was reliable yesterday, but actually one of the five-star hotels housed a homeless person for a couple of weeks under the pretense that it was somebody that came back from overseas. When the person was ready for discharge, he was asked for a forwarding address, only to tell the official that he didn't have one because he was homeless. He hadn't come back from overseas. He just joined the back of the queue 2 weeks ago and spent a fortnight getting 3 square meals and a bath every day on the government.
It was a story so many wanted to be true. Speaking on the AM show last Thursday, National's Michael Woodhouse couldn't say who the man was, but he was adamant his 2-week luxury stay at the Crowne Plaza happened.
This was an anecdote, a very reliable anecdote from a health professional in Auckland, and I don't have it verified, but I just say to you that there's a tip of an iceberg of a number of stories which just underscores what a shambles this is.
The man became a folk legend. The story was picked up by dozens of news outlets here and overseas. Journalists went into overdrive trying to track him down, but requests to Woodhouse for more details proved fruitless. Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield, who had also faced pressure to explain the saga, yesterday sought to clarify.
Question that has been outstanding for the last few updates, a homeless person who apparently spent some time in managed isolation in Auckland. As far as we can tell, this is cannot be verified and may well be an urban myth. Sorry to disappoint you there.
The Ministry of Health weren't the only ones who wanted to clear things up. Housing Minister Megan Woods sent a letter to Woodhouse's office demanding an explanation. The letter states that upon hearing the claim, she asked officials to urgently investigate. They interviewed staff, reviewed the records of all 1,706 people who'd been through the facility, checked CCTV footage and found nothing to back up the tale. But Woodhouse isn't budging.
The absence of any evidence that it did occur is not evidence that it didn't. And in any event, if they have gone to such lengths to verify the story, they certainly acknowledge by those actions that it could have happened.
But do you have proof that it did?
I have a very reliable source who has told me what they believe to be correct, and I have communicated that. I stand by the comments that I've made.
Are they someone who's staying at the Crowne Plaza?
I'm not going to reveal the source except to say that it's reliable and well informed.
And he's got the backing of his boss. Here's Todd Muller on Morning Report today.
Well, he spoke to me at the time and said his source was incredibly reliable and professional, and I back him.
So Michael Woodhouse doesn't need to provide any actual proof, which he doesn't have?
He has a source that he spoke to about this. He's very comfortable with the veracity of it, and that's where it ends from my perspective.
But upon closer inspection, there appear to be multiple issues with Woodhouse's claims, not least the check-in process at the Crowne Plaza. These quarantine guests say wandering in off the street would have been tricky.
We were basically escorted from the bus with our bags by either a member of the police or people in military uniform. So it was really quite strict. And even when we got there, we had to show ID. We had to check in like you would a normal hotel, and I think I even had to give my credit card in case you bought alcohol or something like that as well.
The area where the bus dropped us off was fenced off, so that it would have been pretty unlikely for anyone else to be able to come in. After we came in, we had to fill out some forms about health issues and any other requirements for the government people and the health people. And then we had to go and register with the hotel after that, where they asked for credit cards as well.
And local social services say the majority of Auckland Central's rough sleepers are still in the accommodation that was organised for them during lockdown. Today, Checkpoint made multiple attempts to clarify the situation with the National Party. Todd Muller and Michael Woodhouse refused to front for an interview, say whether the story was true or provide any evidence. Via text, Michael Woodhouse said Newstalk ZB political editor Barry Soper could verify his claim. Barry Soper today said he believed the story was true.
I'm not sure whether we do have the same source, but certainly I had talked to Michael Woodhouse about it to try and establish the veracity of the claim that was made, because it seemed extraordinary to me. I know they've been lax at these hotels, but this lax I thought was probably beyond the pale. But the source that I used when I went public with it is a very reliable one.
Meanwhile, Megan Woods says she has yet to receive any information from Mr Woodhouse to back up his claim, which extensive inquiries have found no evidence of. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
It is 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. The homeless man having 2 weeks in an isolation hotel, believe it or not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested in your feedback regarding the Health Minister. So masks on international flights won't be compulsory and aircrew from airlines other than Air New Zealand can't be forced to have tests. What do you make of that? The man who helped set up AJ Hackett Bungee concedes the company's finances were stretched to the limit before a more than $10 million government bailout announced today. The business has been identified as a strategic tourism asset as part of the government's $400 million tourism recovery package. It gets a $5.1 million grant and another $5.1 million is available through a loan. The company's already had more than $1.3 million in wage subsidies and has applied for the second round, but says despite today's welcome cash injection, it will still have to cut some staff. I asked AJ Hackett Bungee co-founder Henry Van Ash how much he applied for.
We asked for considerably more than that. $10 million over 2 years is a good outcome for us.
What did you ask for?
Nonetheless, I don't have those numbers right in front of me at the moment.
Oh, you must know, Henry. You would have been very much involved in the application.
Yeah, I was. It was probably about double that, but less than double that.
So $5 million is a grant. What are you going to use that on?
Well, the big thing for us is making sure that we don't lose the jump masters that take a long time to train. And then obviously behind the scenes we've got, the administration, health and safety people, our whole team behind that doing it. We've got all of our facilities that we need to maintain. It's just across the board really, but principally it's on retaining those crew.
So how many jump masters do you have?
We have about 60 jump masters, and that sort of 60. And we've got amusement device people and NZ 5848 people. So we've sort of got two different groups: one who are principally doing bungee, and one who do the more mechanised pieces like some of the swings and zip rides and things like that.
So is it not possible to hibernate your business then?
We actually had put some of these businesses into, and some of them we've got 13 different activities across 3 locations. So we already had hibernated some of them, and put a lot of it onto just operating part-time, basically.
So do you still reckon you're going to lose staff despite this money?
Well, yeah, we are. We had nearly 250 crew, so we're still going to be probably around about 100 crew to keep running even with this additional funding. So
$5 million is a loan. What are the conditions for that loan? When do you have to pay it back? What's the interest rate?
We haven't actually got a lot of detail on that as yet, but hopefully we won't need that loan, and if things go well through the next 12 months, we won't need that, but we'll just have to wait and see how things evolve.
So this application, you have to have exhausted all alternative options for funding support in order to qualify for money. So who did you try for investment, and did banks turn you down?
Well, I don't know if you've had any dealings with banks about money, but they're all pretty scared as well at the moment. So they're bringing on much more rigorous conditions into all of their loans because they don't know what's going to happen either. So we have had a lot of discussions with the bank over the last 3 months, and they have extended our facilities and they've brought in more rigorous conditions. We've been running Bungee for about 11,500 days before this COVID thing came up, and then we had 50 days of no revenue. So it was a very, very costly period.
So did they tell you no more, Henry? They wouldn't help you out any further? They wouldn't extend any of your facilities further? That was at end of the road with normal financial institutes?
End of the road with the banks, yes.
So what would have happened if you didn't get this money?
Well, we would have just had to put everything further into hibernation and then just hope for the best.
What are you down to in terms of turnover as a percentage of pre-COVID?
Oh, we're down. We're down a lot. We're probably about 40% of our former revenues. This time of the year is usually a bit quiet anyway, but we don't know what's going to happen through July and August.
Can you survive without an Aussie bubble?
Well, we certainly can't survive in the same way that we were, pre-COVID. The Aussie bubble is going to make a big difference, and there'll be a lot of people from Australia who are keen to get over here and get travelling again.
How long do you reckon you would have lasted in your current state without this extra money?
I don't know how long this piece of bungee cord. We would have been able to keep sort of stumbling along probably, but we certainly would have had a lot more job losses, and and the uncertainty continues.
Were you insolvent before this money came through?
Well, not technically.
What does that mean, Henry? Not technically.
Well, technically insolvent. So, what's insolvent? If the bank says there's no more money or whatever. I mean, that's quite a tricky question, really. Were you insolvent?
Okay, were you up against the wall here, Henry, in terms of your cash flow?
Yes, we were up against the wall in terms of our cash flow.
All options exhausted, nowhere else to go.
Yeah, it's been a really tough time. It's the same for most tourism businesses are finding it extremely tough, and a lot of businesses all across New Zealand are having a tough time. And COVID's still continuing to accelerate around the world. So how do we know? There's a massive amount of uncertainty.
So it's not an overstatement to say that this is a lifeline for you.
Oh, it's definitely a lifeline for us, and hopefully we'll have people coming here to go bungee with us, and the effects will flow on into the rest of the community.
And that is Henry Van Ash from AJ Hackett Bungee. We'll hear from the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis, after the 6 o'clock news. Let us know what you think about that. Is $10 million well spent in propping up AJ Hackett Bungee? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Labour and Green MPs have given up hiding their growing frustrations with New Zealand First vetoing their flagship policies. In the latest blow, Auckland Light Rail has been given the kibosh, with Cabinet failing to reach agreement on either of the two proposals, meaning the project won't be revisited until after the election. Once again, the confidence and supply agreement between Labour and the Greens has taken a hit. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Justice Minister Andrew Little hasn't had a good run negotiating with New Zealand First. He'd work with them again, he says, but he didn't stop there.
Might change the ground rules, but...
Auckland Light Rail by 2021 was Labour's big election promise. Up until today, the government's official line was that negotiations were ongoing with New Zealand First. But Transport Minister Phil Twyford confirmed this afternoon the writing had been on the wall for some time.
It was clear before we went to Cabinet that New Zealand First were not going to support it.
But despite the project being put on ice until after the election, Phil Twyford wouldn't go far to say he was annoyed with New Zealand First.
This is coalition government. They've got different priorities and different political principles than us. Whether you're talking about industrial relations reform or the capital gains tax or light rail, New Zealand First, they've got their views about those things. I always hoped we'd get them over the line, but it wasn't to be.
Green Party co-leader James Shaw is less forgiving that another policy in the Greens' confidence and supply agreement with Labour has been placed on the back burner. He says New Zealand First aren't acting in good faith.
I have faith in the Green Party's confidence and supply agreement with Labour, yes. I don't have faith that New Zealand First are able to uphold their own coalition agreement. Their coalition agreement says that they will act in good faith to ensure that all other agreements can be complied with.
But New Zealand First leader Winston Peters brushed off the accusation.
We've acted in good faith, but the Greens 3 hours ago, were telling you that they were responsible. And then 2 hours later, they had a different epiphany and now saying we're breaching some sort of contract, to which we were never part.
National's finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says the government's coalition is shambolic and causing economic uncertainty.
The light rail was a critical policy and it's been dropped. We've seen the deal with to help rents situations with small businesses dropped. Look, what we're seeing is at a time of absolute economic crisis, when clarity and leadership is needed from a government, instead we're getting confusion, infighting and instability.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's just part of being in an MMP system. Light rail isn't the first and won't be the last casualty in the Labour New Zealand First coalition tussle. Earlier this month, the two parties reached agreement on fair rent reductions and compulsory arbitration as part of the commercial rent dispute process. But now Mr Peters is back at the negotiating table, claiming what he agreed to and what the legislation says are two different things. Mr Little has no idea when the legislation might be finalised.
They've raised a couple of issues. I have to say they're not new, but in any event, they wanted to continue discussions, so those discussions are continuing.
Mr Peters denies he's blocking anything.
The job of the Minister was to go away and write the legislation underpinning the agreement. There was no connectivity between the two.
Mr Little says he doesn't agree with that at all and pointed to Mr Peters being at the Cabinet meeting when the final decisions were made and endorsed. Adding to the list of stalled policy ahead of the election is the rape trial reforms. And Mr Peters warns it won't stop there.
We said from the word go that we were the party of common sense, and common sense is what you're seeing breaking out everywhere now.
From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, tip-top calls time on Eskimo pies. Tourism Minister Calvin Davis on the $10 million rescue package for AJ Hackett Bungee, and an update on the 7-year-old disabled boy Jeremiah, who spent lockdown in the best part of the last 6 months living in a garage, sharing a double bed with his mother and sister. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. The homeless man who allegedly spent 2 weeks in lockdown at a 5-star hotel, or anything else. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The Health Minister won't take responsibility for a large number of people being released from managed isolation early without being tested for COVID-19. David Clark told Checkpoint it's an operational issue and he's helping to sort it out. He says the Director-General of Health has taken responsibility for the blunder. A community COVID-19 testing centre in Auckland says it's had triple the number of people through its doors this week. The Whānau Ora Community Clinic in Wiri says around 300 people a day are seeking a test, up from from 100, but says the centre is well stocked to cope with the demand. A new case was recorded in managed isolation in Rotorua today after a person flew from Auckland. The co-founder of AJ Hackett Bungie says a $5.1 million government grant has saved significant job losses at the tourism company. Henry Van Ash told Checkpoint the company asked for significantly more than that, but it will help them keep highly skilled crew such as jump masters. Auckland Police have arrested 3 men and seized more than $650,000 worth of assets, including 5 luxury vehicles from the Comanchero gang. A patched member, a gang associate and a motor vehicle dealer appeared in the Auckland District Court today on money laundering and organised crime charges. Engineers are inspecting the entire Wellington railway network after some of the electrified Mātangi carriages have suffered damage. Commuters are facing significant delays as a result. A spokesperson for Transdev says they don't know why they're coming back damaged, but it's not a safety risk for passengers. Some of the country's favourite sweet snacks are getting new names. Responding to the Black Lives Matter movement, Afghan biscuits and Eskimo pie ice creams are undergoing a rebrand. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time for the business news now with Emma Hatton. Good evening, Emma. So Reserve Bank has decided to hold the official cash rate. What else did they have to say today?
Good evening, Lisa. Yes, so no surprises there that the cash rate has stayed put. Central Bank, of course, made the commitment to hold it there for 1 year when it set it at 0.25% in March. There was some speculation for a while it would drop that rate into negative territory before the end of the year, but that's not looking like it's on the cards at all now. Some still think it might be on the cards after March, but that's yet to be seen. For now, the bank is using that quantitative easing program, so its big bond buying program. That's its weapon of choice. So basically today, out of the Monetary Policy Committee, everything stays as is, but the bank has signalled it could do more if it's needed. It did note that it's not yet clear whether the monetary stimulus delivered to date is sufficient to meet its mandate. Those are its words. So that's a clear indication that the Reserve Bank is still considering doing more if it needs to. And many think that more measures will be needed. So economists are at the moment thinking an expansion of that bond buying program by August is the most likely plan. So they think that program could be up to as much as $90 billion. It's currently set at $60 billion at the moment. Remembering at the same time, it's still actually got $40 billion of that program still available, so it hasn't drawn on that whole $60 billion yet. So it makes sense that they're not rushing to increase it right at this time because they need to finish what they've started. Also out of the statement, it did call out the high New Zealand dollar, which has been putting pressure on export earnings. So kind of just frames that as a bit of a headwind, on top of everything else that's going on, and not something that they would actively target at this point, although they'd probably like to see that pressure drop off a bit. It said, the obvious, while domestically things were pretty good and better than initial forecasts, internationally it's still really negative. So a lot talked about today, a lot of chat, nothing out of the blue, nothing actually new though. The August monetary statement is the one we're being told to keep an eye on. That's where the bank will give details on, like I mentioned, possibly increasing that bond buying program, as well as give a bit more detail on other tools in its toolkit that it's talked about before, such as foreign asset purchases, which may have an impact on that high exchange rate, further rate cuts, or some special lending schemes. So, the important takeaway, it's still reiterating it's prepared to do more if needed. The main fiscal stimulus for the economy is, of course, coming from the government and its budget. But the RBNZ has got some levers with the monetary support it can offer.
Just losing you a little bit there, Emma. Can you just do a quick whip around the markets for us before you go?
Apologies, Lisa. NZX top 50 is closed up just over 1%, 1.14%, or 126 points to close at 11,259. New Zealand dollar sitting at 64.6 US cents, 93 Australian and 51.6 British pence.
Good to talk to you. That is Emma Hatton for our business news this evening. Now, last night, Checkpoint brought you the story of a family, including a young disabled boy in a wheelchair, who've been living in a South Auckland garage for 6 months because of a lack of suitable housing. Maria, her 7-year-old son Jeremiah, who has cerebral palsy, and his sister, who has epilepsy, share a double bed in the garage attached to a granny flat that is used by 4 generations of the whānau. The family's on the housing waiting list, and after Checkpoint got involved, their priority rating went up 4 spots. The Associate Minister, Chris Farfoy, who has responsibility for public housing, he came on the program last night and said MSD had apologised to the family and he was asking them to contact the family today and expedite the search for appropriate accommodation. But this is just one family, and there are currently 900 people waiting to get into a modified state house. Joining me now is the Disability Rights Commissioner, Paula Tesoriero. Thank you for joining me, Commissioner. Is this good enough, this case?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, no, it's not. I mean, it's fantastic to see that government ministers have intervened in this particular case to expedite situations for this family. But this case is by no means an isolated one, and it is illustrative of the sort of situations that disabled people and their families can face, because we really have, as a country, for a very, very long period of time, for decades, we've neglected universal design and creating and building accessible homes. So while ministers have intervened in this case, it doesn't solve the issue for other families with disabled family members who are living in similar conditions while they wait for a suitable home. And I don't think many New Zealanders would find that sort of situation acceptable.
So, as a country, have we failed people living with disability when it comes to housing?
We certainly have not done good enough, Lisa. So the right to access a home is it's one of the fundamental human rights that successive governments over the years have signed up to a number of international commitments. And there's been a long-standing shortage of accessible housing stock for decades. The right to housing or housing accessible issues is one of the top issues for disabled New Zealanders, and it's one of those issues which is coming to me with increasing volume, and the stories that I hear are completely unacceptable. Now,
what kind of things do you hear? What kind of things are you hearing?
I really hear that it's very difficult for people to find accessible homes. It's very difficult to get movement on greater targets for universal design. So universal design is when you build properties to meet the needs of the greatest number of people. So when we think about a country like ours, we've got an ageing population, 24% of the population are disabled, and we have families with young children. If you build with those universal design principles in mind, then you can create a better outcome for everyone. And so the sort of situations that I hear are, bearing in mind that there's a significant portion of disabled people who are on low incomes and disabled children who live in poverty. What I hear is that those who are renting find it very difficult to have landlords, for the most part, modify their homes, and those who are on waiting lists for houses through Kāinga Ora do report situations where they're waiting for some time because of a lack of accessible housing.
Have you had a talk to the ministers recently about this issue?
Yes, I have. And look, ministers have been very receptive and have signalled a commitment to making some improvements. I think the thing that I will continue to be calling for, though, is to lift the 15% target that Kāinga Ora have around universal design. I think we need to be far more ambitious as a country.
What's the right number, do you reckon, as a percentage? Sorry to interrupt, but what would your goal be?
Well, look, I'm a 100% person. I think you shoot for the stars, but at least we should be able to meet the demand. So the ministry doesn't currently record how many houses are fully accessible, but if there are 900 people waiting
for transfer to get a modified state house, and at the very least we should be building to demand. But I think, at the end of the day, if we accept that housing is a fundamental human right and every New Zealander has a right to housing, then I would set the target much higher. And look, it's really
so what,
50%?
50%, would that be reasonable?
I think it's about having a really solid commitment, and there's probably not a perfect percentage. As I say, I would probably go higher. I think it is about looking at what's fair and reasonable, but 15% is a small portion of the housing stock. We had a visit earlier this year from a United Nations expert on housing, and she delivered a report which described the New Zealand housing situation as a significant human rights crisis, and she said it particularly impacted on Māori, Pacific, single parents and disabled people. And, so here we have an international expert who is very familiar with what happens around the world, and she cites the situation in New Zealand as a significant human rights crisis.
So are we currently breaching people's human rights as a country by not having reasonable access to appropriate housing for the disability sector?
So for disabled people, we are most certainly not meeting our commitments to ensuring that disabled people have the right to a decent home. And
so we are breaching their human rights then?
Oh, well, absolutely. And I think, these are systemic issues, Lisa, and it's not just about the house itself. It's thinking about, the transport systems to the house, the infrastructure in the cities that we build. And, we're not really a very accessible country. We like to think that we are, but actually we fall short in a number of areas for disabled New Zealanders. And on the housing front...
Sorry to interrupt, but the fact that Kāinga Ora doesn't even record the number of houses it has that are fully accessible to a wheelchair, does that not tell you that they are not placing significant stock in the issue if they can't even bother to record the number of houses?
Oh, I absolutely agree that things need to be better there. There needs to at the least be an audit of the accessible housing stock, so what is available. Lifemark, which is a company that specialises in universal design, estimate that 1 to 2% of New Zealand's housing stock is accessible, yet 1 in 6 people require some form of modification to their home. Now, with an ageing population, you can expect that situation will rise, and we've got a fantastic opportunity, ironically, coming through COVID with increased investment in infrastructure and housing, to really put disabled people front and centre and really make a solid commitment to build houses with universal design. It future-proofs those houses. It's far cheaper to do it at the start than retrofit, and it actually means that disabled people have the same choice and can exercise their rights alongside every other New Zealander.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's the Disability Rights Commissioner, Paula Tesoriero, joining us on the issue, really, of accessible housing and the fact that there simply is not enough of it. This comes from the story we did last night about our family living in a garage. They'd been there for 6 months. And just an update, Mum Maria has confirmed that she has been contacted by MSD today, as promised by the Associate Housing Minister, Chris Farfoy. She is still working through options with MSD and they're looking for a solution. We will keep you up to date. It is 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Let us know what you think of that. The Commissioner there saying that 15% of stock that is suitable for people with disabilities is simply not enough when it comes to housing. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Well, time's up for Afghan biscuits, Eskimo pie ice cream, Chicos and Redskins lollies. All the sweet treats are getting new names as the Black Lives Matter movement sweeps through the consumer market. But experts say shoppers can be a bit sceptical. Katie Todd reports.
The Black Lives Matter movement has erupted into worldwide protests and prompted a social media tsunami, urging people to call out anything that doesn't celebrate diversity. And that cancel culture has now permeated your local supermarket. Nestlé issued a statement yesterday announcing a name change for Chicos and Redskin lollies stocked in some New Zealand dairies and supermarkets.
The names have overtones which are out of step with Nestlé's values, which are rooted in respect.
Now 2 Kiwi classics are also getting a shake-up. Griffin's says it's in the process of finding a new name for its Afghan biscuits, which it says could be named as a wartime reference, although there's other theories circulating. And Tip Top has pledged to rename its Eskimo Pie ice cream bars and remove the Eskimo character printed on the packet, acknowledging the name has changed meaning since being introduced in 1940. Pascal's is yet to advise if it will rename or reshape its soft Inuit-themed sweets called Eskimos, but it's right in the firing line of social media commentary. Melanie Sharma-Barrow is a consultant whose firm educates companies on diversity and culture, and she thinks brands should set a good example.
It's very difficult. You're at the supermarket, you want to feed your family, you want to feed yourself. It's really difficult to ask New Zealanders to make that choice of awareness. It's hard enough to make people think about the language they use.
The contention around Eskimo pie and Eskimo lollies already dates back more than a decade. In 2009, the academic Nicole Gombe drew attention to the effect the sweet depictions had on some Inuit communities, and Pascal said the overwhelming majority of consumers didn't find Eskimos to be offensive.
What is remarkable about New Zealand is the degree to which, relatively speaking, there is an awareness about and sensitivity to Indigenous issues. And so at some level, perhaps that has become stronger over the years.
The head of marketing and international business at Victoria University, Val Hooper, says consumers are right to question whether the name changes are long overdue.
Companies are driven by the need to make profit, and their shareholders want them to make profit. But I think this has become a very big thing and a very big international thing. So while their previous stand and the previous naming was tolerated, I think now the push is so overt that companies feel obliged to make these sorts of decisions and to change potentially offensive names.
Arguably one of New Zealand's foremost authorities on sweet treats is writer Madeline Chapman. She ranked all 65 dairy lollies and all 142 biscuit flavours in New Zealand from worst to best for the spin-off, and thinks Eskimo lollies could probably be removed from the shelf entirely because they're not very delicious. But Ms. Chapman says companies can literally name a lolly anything they want, so making sure it doesn't offend anyone isn't difficult.
It's kind of amazing that people in the first place saw a bunch of sugar clumped together and thought of a race of people or a certain community. If you can draw that long bow, you can draw a long bow to anything. Just call them, lino or something, which is another thing I'm looking at right now.
Val Hooper says we might never know why controversial names were able to creep into New Zealand lolly cupboards, but brands should double-check that their values are reflected in every aspect of their business, including product names. For Checkpoint, call Katie Todd, TNA.
And I know you're going to have some opinions on that story, so get in touch. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. If we're changing the names, what should they be? Let's get some suggestions from you. The email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And we're getting a lot of feedback from you regarding fact or fairy tale, the alleged homeless man in 5-star isolation. This is the claim made by Michael Woodhouse. Helen says, shame on you, Michael Woodhouse. Stop scaremongering. If you don't have evidence, then keep quiet. The country is tired and already anxious about the possibility of more cases, our tanking economy, not to mention a lockdown experience that was a real struggle for some. Sure, call the government out on genuine failings, but this cheap point scoring that's going on, yeah, we all know there's an election coming, is irresponsible, insensitive and plain wrong. You come across as arrogant, snipey and so out of touch with where New Zealand is right now. Grow up. Cheers, Helen. Thanks for getting in touch, Helen. Isaac says, National just lost my vote. Woodhouse not backing down from this story strays into Trump alternative facts territory. It is terrifying. He's clearly speaking to a growing constituency of right-of-centre conspiracy theorists. Please, 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 let's focus on the truth. No more lies. This one. Jacinda checked into a quarantine hotel with Elvis. I have this from a really reliable source, says that listener. And finally, Woodhouse says just because there is no evidence doesn't mean it is not true. Would this apply to a report that 10 Martians had checked into the Crown Plaza? Is this the sort of evidence-based decision-making a National Party would take into government? Keep that feedback coming, 2101, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The world's top-ranked men's tennis player, Novak Djokovic, has tested positive for the coronavirus. He's admitted that organising and playing a tournament over the weekend was wrong and says he's deeply sorry. There were no masks worn by players or supporters at the event in Belgrade, and social distancing was flouted. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Novak Djokovic organised the exhibition tennis tournament to bring the sport to the Balkan states and give fans something to cheer about. Now the event is the epicentre of a coronavirus outbreak, with at least 4 players and Djokovic's wife so far testing positive. Players posed for photographs with fans and ball kids and partied in a Belgrade nightclub after hours. In this footage, Novak Djokovic dances topless in the crowd and does the limbo on stage with nightclub guests and other players. In a contrite tweet, the men's number 1 said he thought the virus had weakened and he thought the conditions were right for hosting the event.
Unfortunately, this virus is still present, and it's a new reality that we're still learning to cope and live with. I'm hoping things will ease with time so we can all resume lives the way they were. I'm extremely sorry for each individual case of infection. I hope that it will not complicate anyone's health situation and that everyone will be fine.
Djokovic caused a stir in April when he said he wouldn't be vaccinated against COVID-19 should a vaccine become available. His comments have added fuel to incorrect conspiracy theories spread on the internet about the virus. Djokovic's wife Yelena has also falsely claimed the virus is linked to 5G. Australian player Nick Kyrgios said on Twitter, "Don't at me for anything I've done that has been irresponsible or classified as stupidity. This takes the cake." Christopher Clarey is the tennis writer for the New York Times. He says the cluster shouldn't affect the plans for the US Open to proceed in August.
I don't think this really impacts that too much. I mean, obviously, if a bunch of players in the sport at the high level were to test positive or end up with, health issues because of the coronavirus, that could impact the field. But I do feel that they're going to get a tournament will happen unless there's a big second wave in the US.
That report from Rachel Mealy. Meanwhile, new coronavirus cases are in double digits for the 8th day running in Victoria, and people in Melbourne are rushing to get tested. The state's chief health officer says the numbers are worrying, but he's relieved that the community transmission numbers appear to be stabilising. The ABC's Samantha Donovan has more.
For the 3rd day in a row, there's a rush on drive-through coronavirus tests at some of Melbourne's biggest shopping centres.
I was sick yesterday, so I just decided to come in and get tested. Yeah, I think this is just a precautionary thing for work, but I'd risk infecting everyone there and such. So yeah.
Yeah. So my daughter, she's woken up with a bit of a temperature, and we were in the area of Pakenham on the weekend, so that does make me a little bit concerned.
9:11 and I got here at about 3 minutes to 9 and I'm about 5 cars into the car park, so I think I'll be here for a while. I've got the iPad in the back seat for my baby so she doesn't crack it.
Some people reported waiting for 4 hours for tests at shopping centres yesterday. Victoria's Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton says the state has capacity to test 20,000 people a day, and people should shop around to find testing sites that aren't too busy.
But again, the message hasn't changed for anyone. It's just unfortunate that people are only really prompted to testing by an increase in cases. We want people to test all of the time, not just when there's some anxiety about, where case numbers are going. We have an opportunity to control numbers across Metro Melbourne if everyone, all of the time, considers that if they're symptomatic, they isolate at home, they don't see others, they present for testing, they get a negative result and they can go about their normal life, or they get confirmed as a case and we can follow up and control transmission.
Victoria's 20 new cases today include 7 connected to known outbreaks, 1 from hotel quarantine and 9 from routine testing. The sources of another 3 cases are under investigation. 3 of the known cases are linked to one family from Keilor Downs in Melbourne's northwest, bringing that cluster to 15 cases in all. Professor Sutton says the case numbers, although small, are very concerning. He's pleased, though, that the community transmission numbers appear to be stabilising.
I was very concerned a week ago that those numbers of 10 community cases would be 20 by now. I think it's a testament to our contact tracing efforts and the 24/7 work that's going on that we've managed to keep that number stable. The risk is absolutely that it could double every week, and that's why we have to really go out in force with testing and all of the contact tracing and all of the engagement.
And that report from Samantha Donovan. I'm just having a chuckle at some of the feedback that is coming in before we get to the news on the changing of names for sweets. Chris says, I'm highly offended that they are not changing the name Jaffa. It's hurtful to Aucklanders.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Health Minister says he won't be taking responsibility for the slip-up that allowed hundreds of people to be released early from managed isolation without being tested. Most of those let out on compassionate grounds were not tested, nor were about half of all those released between June the 9th and 16th. David Clark told Checkpoint he has expressed incredible frustration the mistake was made, but it's an operational matter.
That has been acknowledged. Dr Bloomfield has taken responsibility for it and is setting about fixing it. I, of course, want assurances that that is on track, and at this stage I can see that the Ministry is indeed getting on and fixing the problem.
David Clark says he's responsible for ensuring the mistake is not repeated. The European Union will reportedly ban travellers from the US, Russia and Brazil when it reopens its borders next week. The New York Times is reporting it has seen a draft of the list of countries deemed safe, and there are some notable absentees. Our correspondent Rachel Silverman has more.
As European countries prepare to reopen their economies and their borders, they're considering lists of visitors based on how their countries are faring with the coronavirus pandemic. According to the New York Times, the benchmark is the EU's average number of new infections per 100,000 people over the last 2 weeks. For the EU, that's 16, compared to 107 for the US, 190 for Brazil, and 80 for Russia. Rachel Silverman, San Francisco.
400 Samoan cruise ship workers stranded on anchored liners are desperate to get home to their families. Most of them are waiting off the Miami coast, and the New Zealand government says it is open to offering consular assistance if asked. First Union is working closely with its Samoan counterparts on what the union's president, Robert Reid, calls a serious situation.
All of the Samoan workers are worried, their families are worried in Samoa, and the reason that Samoa First Union contacted us to talk to the New Zealand government is that they are concerned that the Samoan government really is not doing enough.
Robert Reid of First Union. The Green Party's co-leader James Shaw says New Zealand First isn't acting in good faith over the Auckland Light Rail. The project, a key policy in Labour and Greens' confidence and supply agreement, has been put on ice until after the election because the coalition government cannot agree on it. Mr Shaw says New Zealand First aren't abiding by their own agreement with Labour.
I have faith in the Green Party's confidence and supply agreement with Labour, yes. I don't have faith that New Zealand First are able to uphold their own coalition agreement. Their coalition agreement says that they will act in good faith to ensure that all other agreements can be complied with.
James Shaw says delaying the project is a slap in the face to Aucklanders. Engineers are inspecting the entire Wellington railway network because some of the electrified Mātangi carriages have suffered damage. This evening's commuter services have been delayed or disrupted as a result, and buses have replaced trains on some lines. The network operator Transdev says some carriages are returning to Wellington damaged, but at this point they don't know why. A locomotive and carriages used on Dunedin's Taieri Gorge Railway have left Dunedin for the North Island. The engine and rolling stock leased by the council-owned company Dunedin Railways are no longer being used, as the line has been mothballed with the loss of 50 jobs. Some of those workers joined a group of supporters to see the locomotive off this morning. Among them was Judy Trevathan, who's worked for the company for 16 years.
It's actually quite sad, just watching our train go past, and there's now a lot of knowledge and qualifications all just disappearing.
Judy Trevathan. It's feared the train may be the last service run by Dunedin Railways. It's 4 minutes past 6. The All Black and Crusaders lock Scott Barrett will miss the rest of the Super Rugby Aotearoa competition because of a foot injury. He injured his big toe during a training match last week and was forced to miss the side's win over the Hurricanes at the weekend. Barrett has been told he needs surgery. Cody Taylor will replace him as Crusaders captain. Meanwhile, Rugby Australia's push for closer ties with New Zealand has extended to potentially offering it pool matches in its bid to host the 2027 Rugby World Cup. Chair Hamish McLennan says he's open to sharing games with New Zealand to strengthen a relationship he says has taken on increasing importance because of COVID-19. Australia are early favourites to win the 2027 rights. The interim Warriors head coach has wasted no time in laying down the law to his players, demanding they toughen up. Todd Payton, who was previously assistant coach, took over the top job after Stephen Kearney was sacked. He has until the end of the season to impress the club's owners that he's up to taking on the job permanently. Payton is demanding more consistency from the side, which languishes 13th in the 16-team competition with just 2 wins this season. West Ham's hopes of avoiding relegation from English football's Premier League have suffered a blow. They've been beaten 2-0 by Tottenham Hotspur. Third placed Leicester and Brighton drew 0-0. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, academics hit back at the University of Waikato's decision to deliver lectures online only. Research on attitudes to assisted dying from the point of view of voluntary euthanasia doctors in Canada and the terminally ill. The new novel from Philippa Swan exploring the unusually modern life of 1920s American novelist Edith Wharton. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Surface to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland rain spreading south, possibly heavy and thundery. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery in Northland. Strong to gale easterlies until tomorrow morning. Coromandel rain with heavy and thundery falls developing tonight. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne cloudy periods. A few showers tonight. Rain tomorrow with some heavy falls. Strong to gale easterlies developing tonight. Waikato to Horowhenua and Kapiti Coast. Central High Country, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly fine. Occasional rain developing tomorrow, but remaining mostly dry and carpety. Strong gusty southeasterlies developing tomorrow. For Wellington, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Cloud increasing tonight with patchy rain or drizzle in Wellington, Marlborough, Canterbury and eastern Otago. Fine spells developing south of Dunedin tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine weather. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers overnight. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. There's plenty of blame being passed around over the failure to test people released early from managed isolation. But we're no nearer to finding out how or why it has happened. After more than a week, officials have confirmed 51 people out of 54 were allowed to leave isolation before the end of their fortnight on compassionate grounds between June the 9th and 16th. Without being tested. The case of 2 women in that group who would later test positive sparked intense scrutiny of the regime. Our political editor Jane Patterson reports.
After days of questions, it's now clear there was a significant testing failure in the border operation.
It's not what I expected to happen. There were some very clear protocols, of course, around the way in which they interacted with their family members when they were out on that compassionate leave. But I'm not happy with how the system operated. I've made that clear.
The majority of those allowed out on compassionate grounds were not tested, nor were about half of all of those released in that week after June the 8th. But the Health Minister David Clark repeatedly deferred to Ashley Bloomfield when asked how this had been allowed to happen.
The Director-General has been very clear that the system did not do what it said it was going to do. He's taken ownership of that and set about fixing it.
And as for his own responsibility as Minister?
Look, the Director-General has already acknowledged that the system didn't deliver here.
National MP Michael Woodhouse maintains his position the Minister should be sacked.
Look, we're way past that. I think he's dead man walking.
National leader Todd Muller is standing by his comments. The testing failures could possibly have resulted in community transmission.
When you've got over 2,000 people that are out in the community that the government haven't tested when they said they were going to test, and the health specialists are now saying themselves that that is a great risk that the disease has been reseeded in the community, and I think that's a very fair reflection to have.
Dr Bloomfield could not rule out community transmission.
I can't categorically do that. However, what I can say is that there is a very low risk in the first instance because of the circumstances, indeed the 14 days, and the protocols around people leaving managed isolation early on compassionate grounds.
The Ministry also said today that some of the people were allowed to leave early on compassionate grounds with applications approved under the old rules, which did not require testing, even if they left after June the 8th. Dr Bloomfield says action has been taken to improve the system.
We've taken strict action to strengthen our systems, and as soon as we became aware from the 16th, of course, everybody is now being tested.
In Parliament, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said ministers asked specific questions before the new rules were due to take effect.
That prompted the Ministry of Health to reconfirm to my office on the 5th of June that daily testing was occurring for day 3 and day 12 of those at the border, including everyone at facilities, starting from the 8th of June.
And she confirmed another failure to test the more than 2,000 people who left managed isolation in the week after the 8th of June, noting though other protocols were followed.
They were all in quarantine or managed isolation for 14 days. They all had a medical check. None of them had symptoms at departure. The majority, 1,249, have been tested.
No concerns now from National about directly attacking the government's handling of COVID.
We have found out that only 1,200 out of 2,000 people have been tested in our managed isolation. The reality is this is a government that has failed in terms of COVID.
Efforts are still underway to track and test all of those who were allowed to leave without a test in that week in June. Dr Bloomfield says the people who have not been contacted have been sent text messages and are being phoned a 5th time today and have been passed to the Ministry's Enforcement Services team. He says Customs and Police can also be used for contacting them. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The government's taken a leap of faith today, approving more than $10 million in funding for AJ Hackett Bungee after declaring it a strategic tourism asset. The company's getting a $5.1 million grant and access to a loan facility of the same amount from the $400 million Tourism Recovery Fund. It's the third handout to a business under the scheme that's goal is to keep afloat tourist operators that provide significant financial benefit to the wider community. Discover Waitomo is getting $4 million. Part of that is a loan, and Whale Watch Kaikoura is getting $1.5 million. So is it a sound investment for the taxpayer? I asked Tourism Minister Calvin Davis for more details.
Half of it is a grant and half of it in the second year is a loan if they need to use it. There are quarterly declarations. If tourism picks up and they don't need the money, then they don't. They won't get it. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the interest rate is.
Not sure? It's a lot of money to be not sure about what we're charging them.
Well, look, the main thing is that we are supporting the tourism businesses to make sure that they are able to continue. They are able to continue to support their staff and the communities and the region around them. But the finer details, our officials are on top of that.
So what if they can't pay it back? Have we got any claim over their assets?
Look, the thing is that we make sure that we do support them, and if they are unable to continue, that's part of the quarterly declaration, and they won't receive money. So they get money in quarterly instalments, and if they hit problems, aren't able to.
But that only protects us for the quarter that you're paying in. So, what happens if they default on any part of it? Does the taxpayer have any claim to any of the assets held by these businesses that you're extending a component of a loan to?
Well, the idea is to support these businesses so that they can continue, and that's what this money is there for, to support them to continue. If they don't need it because tourism is doing well, that's when they don't receive any more.
No, but I'm asking what happens if they do need it and they need it so much, but they're still not able to keep afloat. What guarantees are there for the New Zealand taxpayer who is in essence bailing them out here? Do we have any claim to the assets of these businesses if they're unable to pay back the money that is a loan?
Well, if you look at the broad support that we've given to businesses from the outset of COVID, many of them have received money and still haven't been able to continue. But this is the government actually backing businesses to continue.
Okay, so how are you assessing their viability then before you choose to invest in them?
Well, that's the process that our officials go through. Like I said, there's...
But you sign it off, don't you? So how are you assessing their viability?
Yeah, so myself and the other tourism recovery ministers, we look at the information that's put in front of us and we make the decisions then.
So what element of that information tells you that they are a winner? What things specifically are you looking at?
Well, as I've said, the officials, they go through all the applications, the ones that they believe are viable, they put towards us. We will say either yes or no to any application. But at this stage, where we've got 300 that will be gone through and analysed and looked at.
But Minister, you've approved 3 already, and these are not insignificant amounts of money. So could you just be clear with us about how you are assessing the viability of these businesses before you put taxpayer money into them?
Well, like I say, with the officials put the information and the applications in front of us, and we make decisions as a group as to whether or not we believe that they deserve it. And obviously, these 3 applications, we believe that they do deserve the support. They are backbones of the tourism industry. They are very important for the regions and the communities that they're in. And so we think on that basis, they deserve support.
But you haven't been specific about, you say, info for money.
Well, so there's a number of things that are considered, and like I say, our officials they go through the applications and we make the decisions as to whether or not to support what's put in front of us. So we consider a number of things. One of the big things is what are the spillover effects into their communities and their regions, because if they do well, then there are other businesses in those towns and regions and communities that will also do well.
So what value of money? Yeah, what value of money do they need to bring into their local economy to be in the hunt for this money?
Well, yeah, when you're looking at a community like Te Kuiti that has spillover effects from Waitomo doing well, Kaikoura, they would have a big impact on many jobs, cafes, souvenir shops, motels, accommodation.
But is there a number, Minister? Because the thing is, looking at this, you're unable to tell me what specifically you're looking for in terms of the viability of a business before you invest. You can't tell me how much economic benefit has to come to the region in order to qualify. So is that quite loose criteria you're using? And subjective?
Well, it's a criteria that will support the communities, the towns, the region, and it's difficult to put a dollar value on how important Whale Watch Kaikoura is to the town and the district of Kaikoura. And it's difficult to put a specific dollar value on how much Discover Waitomo contributes to the King Country area. So, what we're doing is actually supporting whole regions and towns and communities as well as the specific business.
Is there going to be some money for smaller players from this fund?
So we've said already that if smaller businesses or any businesses meet the criteria, that's the consideration that we'll give, but there's also been the broad support that the government has put in since the start of COVID, such as the wage subsidy and the tax measures. So, there has been, and I've said on numerous occasions that the tourism industry has accessed many billions of dollars. There's a lot that has gone into tourism, big businesses, small businesses, and the strategic tourism assets program is just another part of our support, as well as the tourism transitions program.
And that was the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis there. It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lot of you getting in touch about name changes for lollies and biscuits because of their appropriateness or inappropriateness. Will Griffin's change the name of ginger nuts to avoid offending the Scots, this listener says. And Alistair says, perhaps with the advent of COVID-19, we should think of a new name for jet planes. Alistair, thanks for your feedback. Andrew says, Afghans as a redhead, I'm more offended when people eat ginger nuts around me. That's from Andrew. This one says, as a person with a lifelong interest in the amazing Inuit people, I have always thought Eskimo lollies were offensive. But here in New Zealand, most people have never heard of an Inuit. They should call them mummies, then they wouldn't need to change the mould. As for Afghans, I thought those biscuits were named after dogs. Russell says, what about black balls and Jaffas, the latter having negative connotations for Aucklanders here in the south? Now, in respect to that feedback about Eskimo lollies, we have some breaking news for you. Mondelez New Zealand, which owns Pascal, says it will be changing the name of its Eskimo lollies 65 years after they first went on sale in New Zealand. The company says the change reflects the business's ongoing commitment to diversity and inclusion and is in line with the company's purpose and values. It says the name and branding change are currently in progress and will be rolled out as soon as possible. And that obviously comes after news earlier today that Tip Top would also be rebranding and renaming its Eskimo pies. It's been another busy day at community testing centres in Auckland with long queues as people line up to get swabbed for COVID-19. The number of active cases has gone from 0 to 11, coinciding with the winter flu season. One community testing station in South Auckland has seen the number of people turning up for a test triple, while a Whangarei doctor's clinic has had its swab supplies restocked after they ran out. Jean Bell filed this report.
There were long queues around two COVID-19 testing stations on St Luke's Road near the mall and in East Auckland on Botany Road. At Auckland's Whānau Ora Community Clinic today, there was a steady stream of cars pulling into a testing station set up in a large car park. Martini Martiki is out front at the clinic in Wiri, directing people into queues.
It's been crazy here. Yeah. Today's not so bad, eh? But yesterday and the day before, pretty bad. We just filled up the car park and just keep going. We're lucky we've got a big space here.
He says workers stand out amongst the big mix of people coming in.
There's a lot of fear out there though, And I think that's more coming from the work sector than anywhere else. Some people are just doing it so they can go to work, because that's, just part of the rigmarole you've got to go through to go to work these days.
One woman in line to get tested says she popped down during her lunch break.
So I've been unwell since Saturday, coughing and sore throat, and just felt, and with me I work in a medical centre, they thought I should go and come and get tested just to make sure that, I'm okay, and then I will feel better myself, and just hopefully get better in the next few days.
George Ngātai, the director of the Whānau Ora Clinic, says the amount of people coming in soared from 100 to 200 or 300 in the last week.
There could be two reasons. One, obviously, with the positives that have come as of late, but we also noticed that a lot of people are coming through with symptoms because of it being close to winter. Well, we're in winter, and there's a lot more flu symptoms that are actually coming through.
He says the clinic was adequately stocked despite the jump in demand.
We assess where we're currently at every day. We've certainly seen that our numbers have increased, sometimes double, triple the amount that we're normally used to. But as and when that increase is identified, we request more support.
While testing stations were quiet in Wellington today, up in Whangarei, a GP clinic ran out of swabs yesterday, but have now had their supplies replenished. Over in Kaitaia, the practice manager for Te Hiku Hauora, Cheryl Britton, says they've also been very busy. The GP clinic has not run out of swabs, but they have had to duck across the car park to Kaitaia Hospital a few times to replenish their stocks.
We have a very good relationship with the lab that is based at Kaitaia Hospital, who's been very generous in supporting us with providing swabs, as well as the PHO does provide us with some limited amounts as well.
The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says there's no evidence of community transmission and there are plenty of swabs available if there are any shortages. He says there's ready access to testing and district health boards can increase capacity if they need to. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei ko Jean Bell tēnei.
Meanwhile, a guest in managed isolation at the Ibis Hotel in Rotorua has told RNZ they're still in lockdown this afternoon. She says they had a note put under their door this morning telling them to stay in their rooms. There is speculation there has been a positive case, but the Director General of Health says he won't be able to say if that is the case until tomorrow. The guest says communication has been very poor. New Zealanders overseas have seen a rise in hostility to those forced to make the decision to return home, grating against the Prime Minister's message of be kind. Now, with daily cases being caught in isolation facilities as high numbers of New Zealanders return home, those returning feel less welcome than ever. Jordan Bond reports.
With 11 active cases in the country, all having come from overseas, those considering coming home have well and truly noticed not everyone's happy they can. Some people online have called for flights from global hotspots to be scrapped completely, or to limit the numbers of those coming home, or that they should pay the entire quarantine cost. Clint Heiner, who's been in the UK for more than a decade, says he's noticed more anti-returnee sentiment the last couple of weeks.
From certain elements on social media and in the press, they're not so kind. No, it doesn't feel like that.
He runs the 80,000-strong Kiwis in London Facebook group and is well connected in the city. Mr. Heiner says comments they've seen online from people he calls keyboard warriors have been inhospitable towards New Zealanders coming home.
The good headlines of having no cases is now coming down to 5, 6, 7 cases now has made some people feel anxious. Unfortunately, they seem to be directing it towards the people coming in. We're hearing from a few people that they're actually now more concerned about coming home and if they're going to expect this kind of reaction from people when they arrive. They're almost second guessing.
Simon Hampton has been a freelance journalist based in New York for 3 years. He says he'd prefer to stay and continue his life in New York, and so do most people he knows. So coming home is not something he's doing for fun.
I'm one of a number of people that are coming home out of necessity. I've felt the economic pinch from COVID, and the people that have stayed in New York for this long, for 4 months now that it's been, they don't want to leave because they've stuck it out now. They want to continue with their American life. So if they're planning to come home at this point, it's really because they have to come home. It's not people coming home for a holiday.
Back in London, Rachel Barker is working in TV, but is flying back to New Zealand in a few weeks. She still has work in a flat there and again would prefer to stay. But she has an autoimmune disease which would be seriously complicated if she contracted coronavirus. She's been isolating, but with the UK trying to return to normal, she can't just get on with life like some others will.
There's just no way that I feel safe staying here. I can go to a pub, I can go to work, but my health isn't stable enough that I would feel confident that I wouldn't be affected by COVID. So the thought of being back in New Zealand is incredibly exciting.
Cabinet will consider making those returning pay a portion of the hotel quarantine costs. So far, they've spent about $80 million on accommodation. Mr. Hampton says he'd understand if that was looked at on a case-by-case basis, but some people simply couldn't stump up.
Maybe there's an avenue there where they could justify charging people for some of that cost, but I think you have to remember that a lot of people are coming home having lost jobs, having had to break leases on properties, are already under a bit of financial pressure, and so to slap them with another bill is going to be quite hard for them.
The government's considering a co-payment scheme in the next few weeks. If that goes ahead, there might be an even greater rush to beat the deadline. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond. Aho.
Well, we've had a lot of feedback from you regarding Mr Woodhouse's allegation of a homeless man picking up a 2-week freebie at a 5-star hotel by basically tailgating on isolators there and slipping into the hotel, according to him. Steve says, hello, re the homeless fellow picking up a freebie at the 5-star hotel. Hoax. Could I suggest that Mr Woodhouse's incredibly reliable source may in fact have set him up and played him like a fiddle? Really dumb move from National. We desperately need parliamentarians who work together for the betterment of the whole country, says Steve. National does not understand that they stand to gain so much more respect for helping us than currently wasting everyone's time. I was a National supporter, not anymore, says Steve. Kerry has got in touch saying, the abominable snowman conducts a tea party on my front lawn with a cohort of leprechauns at midnight every night. Wow, that sounds like a wonderful shindig. Kerry goes on to say, just because there's no evidence doesn't mean it's not true. Ewan says, dear RNZ, if Michael Woodhouse said he had a witness who told him that a unicorn had spent 2 weeks in a quarantine hotel drinking free champagne, would you accept it unchallenged as news? Ewan, no, we wouldn't, and we haven't accepted this unchallenged either. And this one says, the homeless person using managed isolation, given there is only one undisclosed source and not an ounce of proof, it sounds fabricated to me and typical of the dirty politics that National has become known so well for. If this story was true, there would be most likely be more than one source willing to come forward to verify it. I smell a rat, says that listener. Another person says, I don't believe that homeless man story, not for an instant. It simply isn't supported by the evidence. Of course, if it were true, they say, what would it matter? A New Zealander, starving, living on the streets in the winter, gets hot meals and a warm bed to sleep in. Good, they say. Jennifer's been in touch to say National is so not reading the room on this one. The claim made by Michael Woodhouse, a senior National MP, was taken seriously and investigated thoroughly, because this is what you do when you're serious about maintaining the health of all New Zealanders in a pandemic crisis. Someone else has got in touch about AJ Hackett getting 10 million. They say it's okay, but taxpayers should get equity in the company. It shouldn't be a gift. We will be back tomorrow. Catch you then. First up, first thing tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. St John is cutting 100 jobs in a bid to save $30 million as its financial issues have worsened during the pandemic. The Health Minister won't take responsibility for a large group of people being released early from managed isolation without being tested. And Hawke's Bay officials are being warned the region could transform into a desert in 30 years if nothing is done to combat climate change. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Stranded in Paradise, Amelia Lawley on the plight of migrant workers stuck on Waiheke Island with little prospect of getting home, not much prospect of getting work either. Simon Morris takes on his aversion to horror movies by reviewing The Wretched, and Christina Sanders on her historical novel Jerningham, based around the exploits of those pioneer Pākehā settlers, the Wakefield family, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7.